Tom Luongo, thank you for coming on the Byte Federal podcast. We're so excited to have you.
I appreciate it, Paul. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Man, there's so much to talk to you about. I've been, and a number of the people at Byte Federal have followed your work for some time. So I want to kind of start with the thing that triggered me the first time I saw you, which is the way you set up the chessboard with Jerome Powell, Janet Yellen, the ECB, the UK, and now I've seen in your recent, you're throwing the Japanese central bank in there, the Bank of Japan in there. And it's like, man, this is such a unique voice in a world of global macro analysts that just keep repeating the same stuff. And so for whatever reason, you've got this ability to sort of read the tea leaves, bring in geopolitics, bring in global macro, bring in Bitcoin, gold, currencies, and paint a picture that I've never seen before. And so I know this is a massive first question, but can you set up the chessboard for our viewers, for somebody who's maybe hearing this for the first time, how we got here?
Okay, well, this will be the easiest interview you ever do because it'll take me like 45 minutes. I'll just filibuster it and the thing will be over, right? Okay, so let's start with the beginning. Really, I'm a doctrinaire Austrian, right? So I hate central banks. I want to end the Fed like everybody else, like in that corner of the universe. And up until around, but also like everything else, like I read everybody and I read critics and and I've been around this game for a long, long time before I did it professionally. I was, like so many people out there, so many people who are now my patrons that literally just like scream at their wives or their coworkers or whatever. And in my case, it was, sitting in a laboratory, running experiments and listening to podcasts back in like 2005, 2006. And reading everything imaginable and getting the lay of the land. And this is a way of me saying at some point I had to listen to alternative voices who were not necessarily, that doctrinaire Austro-libertarian critique of central planning, and marry that with real practical analysis by guys like Jim Sinclair and Martin Armstrong and others who are in the pits on a regular basis, trading these markets and seeing how the world actually operates, as opposed to the way we think we would like it to operate. Right? It's a huge discount. So for me, when there was no stakes on the table, when it was just me and my my little trading account, well, that's fine. I lost money a lot. But then once I became a professional, I went to work for Newsmax in 2013, and things weren't working well. Right, being a gold bug just didn't work in the middle of a gold bear market, and I'm like, what's going on here? And so eventually, over time, you put your arrogance aside, you do the hard work, and you constantly just ask questions, and eventually you come to the conclusion that no, the Martin Armstrong's right. The core economy never goes through hyperinflation, and we're the core economy of the world, so the dollar was not going to hyperinflate. Now the euro, on the other hand, or some of the other currencies, that's a different story. So it was not hard for me in 2021 coming out of COVID when I started looking at the situation at hand, knowing there was going to be the inflation was coming, it was here. But then when Powell went to the FOMC and at a supposedly nothing burger FOMC meeting in June of 2021. No, they didn't do anything. You read the Zero Hedge title of the post, and it's nothing burger. The Fed doesn't do anything, except they changed this one little thing, this one little teeny thing, and they raised that by 5 basis points, which is the reverse repo payout rate, raising it 5 basis points above the Fed funds rate. And then I look, and there's the euro crashing, and there's all sorts of weird things happening, and I'm like, but I don't understand. And so then you just keep going back through everything you've read and everything you've heard, and it all just kind of like falls into place. And you go, oh, what if Powell was not a globalist like the rest of these people? And he just asked that simple question, because if he was, he would never drain dollar liquidity, right? So I'm at this point in my life, I'm not a bond expert, I'm still not a euro dollar quote unquote expert, but I understand it. I've been following Jeff Snyder's work over at a lot when he was working for Alhambra Partners for years, actually. I read Jeff all the time, and since he talks in such inside baseball, who the hell can understand actually a word that he says?
Yeah.
That's a and that's just a general criticism of so many people who aren't particularly good at communicating. And I'm not, look, I get elliptical. I'm not going to argue, right? But I understood the basic premise, which is that the Fed was never really in control of its own monetary policy. That was the big TLDR on all of Jeff's work over the years. But what if Powell's not a globalist and the Fed wants to be regain control over its monetary policy? We know that SOFR is happening. I start working on this idea. I start throwing it out there. I get a couple of texts from various financially connected patrons, and they start throwing some ideas in my head. And they're, oh, by the way, what about this? What about this? What about that? We all kind of sat around one day, and I remember just sitting around and listening to it going, oh, the change from LIBOR to SOFR here in the United States. So change from the global benchmark for the price of international dollars went from LIBOR to the secured overnight financing rate, which was implemented by Powell starting under the Trump administration, starting in 2017. And it was a 5-year rollout. So here we are near the end of that rollout period where SOFR was going to become the law of the land starting in January of 2022, where no new debt contracts in the United States would be issued relative to LIBOR. So your credit cards, your credit revolver, your mortgage, your car payment, none of those things. They were all had to be indexed to SOFR and no longer LIBOR, which then meant that no longer was City of London setting the cost of dollars. The U.S. repo markets were setting control of the price of dollars. Well, that to me is a fundamental, like massive shift in the global financial system at the plumbing level, at the incentive level. So that starts to line up. I've always had this theory of Davos. I'm the guy who literally coined the phrase back in 2017. I started calling them the Davos crowd. Like all these oligarchs that convene at Davos and then think they run the world and do all this stuff. So I'm like, oh, I think I get it. Now, I spent about a year sitting there going, if I'm right, then X, Y, and Z is going to happen. If I'm right about that, and then all these things start to occur that are clearly point to a fight between the Federal Reserve and the rest of the world. Nobody wants the Powell to get off the zero bound. There's an insider trading scandal at the Fed in the fall of 2021. Biden is holding his confirmation over his head, and nobody can figure out why. Powell hasn't raised rates. He said inflation's transitory, yada, yada, yada. He hasn't done anything. But those 5 basis points are sitting in the background, and what happened? The reverse repo facility, the balance on it went from about $450 billion in June to by Jackson Hole in late August to over $2 trillion and hit a high of like $2.6 trillion just before the Fed started raising interest rates. So he drained $2 trillion worth of what I would call global M0 from the world. Didn't drain it from the U.S. capital markets. He drained it from the offshore dollar markets because they were the ones screaming. Then you go back to the repo crisis of 2019, which precipitated COVID. Because I firmly believe that COVID was an operation to force the U.S. Treasury market bid list to force the Fed back to the zero bound. And what happened then? I remember Zero Hedge screaming about this, going, why is Jamie Dimon trying to cause a crisis in the repo market? By doing what? Not refusing to take European debt as collateral for U.S. dollar repo transactions.
I remember that.
Okay. It was just Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan to start out with. And then by 2022, it was everyone. And so you put all these things together and you have a picture. And that picture is the U.S. financial system looks at the coming techno-communism of the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and you will eat the bugs and all the rest of it, and says, you know what? There's no room for commercial banking in this world. If their goal is to go to central bank digital currencies, where the central banks do away with the two-tiered monetary system of the central banks print the money, give it to the commercial banks lend it into the private markets, and it's a two-tiered system, right? There's two tracks. They just want to collapse it into one. Well, where do the commercial banks fit into that model? Well, they don't. And you're going to tell me that Jamie Dimon, John Solomon, and all these guys over on Wall Street, all these big guys who smoke far more expensive cigars than I do and drink far more expensive whiskey than I do. You think they're going to go along with that because a bunch of freaking, like a bunch of, banana hammock wearing Germans are saying, no, this is what you shall do? Are you out of your minds? I mean, like, literally when I stop to think of it in those terms, I'm like, that was the dumbest thing I think I've ever heard in my entire life. And I've listened to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez speak. Like, I mean, seriously, I watched the first act of Young Einstein. It was really bad. Like, I've watched a lot of bad, stupid things in my life. And that had to take the cake. So at a certain level, you just say to yourself, who does the Fed work for? The New York banks. Who's cut out of this equation? The New York banks. Yeah, 5 basis points. We get the liquidity. We start draining the liquidity. Powell survives the insider trading scandal. Eventually, the FOMC forces Biden's hand to put a reconfirmation vote on the table for Powell. He passes with 80 votes. He gets a second term. That happens in late February of 2022. And at the March meeting, he starts raising rates. And by July, he's got Christine Lagarde in such a panic, she has to announce the toilet paper, the transmission protection instrument, which is basically, QE to maintain bond spreads. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, we've got Janet Yellen over at Treasury doing everything imaginable to reinstitute QE because she loves doing it so much in yield curve control. She loved doing it so much when she was when she was the Fed chair. Mm-hmm. So that's the background of this. I'm not in any way, manner, shape, or form casting the Fed here as the good guy.
Right.
Okay. That's not what I'm doing. I happen to want to believe at a certain level that Jerome Powell is somewhat of a patriot, being, I don't know, 8th generation Virginian. Right. But even if you're not willing to go there, at the end of the day, the power of the United States has been the power of its banking system and the independence of its banking system. The commercial banking, the free banking of the United States is what built the United States in the 19th century. And I got news for you, and it's been something that the British have targeted to destroy since the day after Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. Okay? And when you understand it from that perspective, when you understand that City of London has, in effect, ruled the world since the formation of the Bank of England in 1694, when you understand it that way, and it doesn't matter what other things that have been grafted on and other groups that have been grafted onto this. At times they fight with the French, at other times they invoke the Italians. Sometimes they grab the Rothschilds, and something. It doesn't matter. At a certain level, this has been going on since the 17th century. Okay. And the United States had a free banking system that literally challenged the old industrial might of Europe. By the beginning of the 20th century, it was unstoppable. One could argue that Lincoln saving the Republic did so in order to stop stop France and Britain from effectively color revolutioning the United States. Even though my heart's with the South on this, like morally and as a libertarian, as morally, the South was correct, right? States' rights, self-determination. Mm-hmm. Eventually, slavery was going to go away anyway. But that was an issue used to reinforce the tariff structure and the trade imbalance between old continental Europe, where the industrial might was, and the U.S. And the South was their supplier. The North was the upstart industrial center, and they needed to be killed in their crib. Mm-hmm. And the way you do that is by lashing the South to them and forcing the South and the North into conflict. And so on all of this stuff's been going on for a long time, and don't kid yourself, folks. If you think that I understood half of what I just said back in 2021 when I saw the June FOMC meeting, you're crazy. Of course I didn't. Over time, it's now 3 years. You sit there and you continue to improve your arguments. You continue to like dig into the history and look at things a little different, and recast things, and you go, oh wow, that makes so much more sense than the way I used to look at it. And so the reality is that we're now at the end of this rate hike cycle for the Federal Reserve. But did anybody think we would ever get the 5.5% and hold it there?
No one. You were the only voice I heard.
So literally. And I was just literally running the Austrian playbook. If I were the Fed chair under these circumstances, what would I do? Well, I'd raise interest rates to 6% and let everybody twist. And I'd let them try and pull me off of that every way they could, because every time they tried to push Powell off of his position, they were using the very statistics and the very arguments that said, hey, I need to keep interest rates at 5.5%. Right. Inflation's still high. Unemployment is still good. You're still running massive deficits in order to run your agenda. Powell understood exactly what these people were doing. Jamie Dimon got it. He kept going to Davos and telling everybody, like, prepare for more oil and 7% interest rates. Like, he kept walking in the room and like with his bag of poo, and then like lit it on fire and stepped on it, like, and right in front of Klaus Schwab. And I'm like, dude, Dimon has. I love this guy. He's got cojones, as it were. I mean, you know, the JP Morgan is many things, but in that respect, like I have to tip my hat to Jamie Dimon to walk into like Evil Corp Central and light some poo on fire in their living room. I think it's great. Yeah,
for as much as like we sit here and yell at the Fed, this was like the first time in kind of recent history I can remember a Fed official telling us exactly what they were going to do and then doing it. There was so much distrust that I spent 2 years going, yeah, no, he'll never raise rates. Yeah, no, he'll never raise rates.
He'll never do that.
Right. And you kept saying, no, rates are going up. And he kept saying, I'm going to raise rates, and he'd raise rates. And then I came to this conclusion. It's like, wait a minute, the enemy of our enemy might be our friend in this entire situation.
It's like, I hate to use, I'm not a huge fan of that phrase or whatever, but if it's a 3-player game, right? And again, like behind me is like just a small portion of my board game collection. When you're playing a kind of a competitive political game, and you're racing to particular spots, or you're trying to control these various resources or assets or whatever, Kissinger was right, or Churchill, whoever said it originally, it doesn't matter. They've all said it. There are no allies in geopolitics. There are only interests. Like, at the end of the day, Jerome Powell and the Fed are a tool right now for my agenda, and my agenda is human freedom. Right? Is freeing us from these, pedophilic, evil freaking people, right? Who 100%. Believe they have the divine right of kings to rule the world, and and diddle kids, and I have no patience for that whatsoever. Yep. So I don't have to have any love for the Fed in order to recognize its potential as an asset. Right. I have to treat them exactly the same way that these people treat us. You can't go into this. You have your passions, you have your perspective that you want of the world that you want to bring into being. Fine. But then you have to put that aside and figure out how strategically you're going to do that as dispassionately as possible. Right. And you have to start thinking like Sheev Palpatine and going, how am I going to manipulate everybody into what it is that I want them to do? What are what moves are you going to make, or is that guy going to make, in order to affect his preferred outcome? So that's how you analyze. So at the end of the day, personnel is policy. And if you understand the incentive structure of, I don't know, let's pick any one of the players at the table, right? Pick Russia, pick Ukraine, pick any of them. It doesn't matter. When you do that and you run the SWOT analysis on them, the SWOT SWOT analysis on them, financial analysis, you go, oh, well, this is his strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. This is what he's going to do. He has to do that for these reasons, because if he doesn't do that, he's going to die. Right. Okay. So he makes this move here or that move there. And then and at the end of the day, if you start thinking like these people, geopolitics becomes really easy. I mean, you feel dirty and you got to take a shower afterwards, and you don't, you have a hard time like relating to your wife after a while, but it's like, or your children, but you're good at this, and maybe that's all I'm good at. I don't know. I certainly haven't been very good at everything else in my life. So there it is.
Well, you've certainly landed in a niche that we're very supportive of, and we're happy to hear your context. There's a lot in that entrance to this conversation, and I want to dig in on a couple of points, not only for myself but for the audience to understand better. You talk about the reverse repo rate. You talk about interest rates as a way to drain global liquidity.
Sure.
I'm suspecting that means specifically the Eurodollar system, but
yes.
Probably leverage at large, right? All over the world.
In general, the whole Eurodollar system, when the Fed was at the zero bound, the whole Eurodollar system was becoming infinitely leveraged because money is free, right?
So what is
trades? At that point, carry trades can just be rehypothecated into infinity.
Into infinity, right? So with this draining of the liquidity globally, how does that specifically put pressure on the Davos crowd?
Because that's how they've operated. That's how they've liquefied the world. Look, the euro is a currency that no one really wants. It's a bad currency, right? It's overvalued, relative to more than half of its members. It's undervalued relative to Germany, but every day they keep destroying Germany even more. So that's actually even a misnomer at this point. It puts pressure on Davos because Davos used cheap money by which, through infinite leverage, to then buy everything. The IC blob here in the United States, the military industrial complex. This is how they.
So it's the one nation under bribery.
Yeah, effectively.
The Whitney Webb theory, and this is the financing behind it.
Well, absolutely. And, but at the same time, you have to realize that what leverage giveth on the way up takes away twice as fast, if not faster, on the way down, because you're now leveraged, and your equity position falls as a percentage of your capital, the margin, your underlying liquidity, your underlying margin position, as a percent, it falls far faster. If you've never had a margin call in your life, folks, try it sometime. You'll understand exactly. Once you've had one, and I've been there, I've been margined out. So I got $3,000 or $4,000 position in some friggin' stock that went the. But it doesn't matter. Like, I didn't have $3,000 or $4,000 to lose, and yet I lost it. So it sticks with you when you see it happen. When you feel it happen, So this is why, for example, when the Bank of Japan the other day or earlier in the month raised interest rates by a few basis points, not a big deal, but bombarded the yen market with apparently around $39 billion worth of reserves, causing a cascading effect of people who were levered along the yen to then have to unwind their trades. And by, all accounts, they spent $40 billion and got about, $5 trillion worth of liquidations. It's a pretty good return on your money if that was your goal.
Right.
And then in the process, all they had to do was they had to throw a pebble down the mountain and cause the avalanche. Because why? Because the market was so unbalanced, short yen at 162, thinking it was going to go to 200. And I warned everybody. I said, don't do this. It's not going to 200. The Bank of Japan and the Ministry of Finance are going to step in here. They have to step in. Japan is already, the inflation is already, if they don't do this, the entire Japanese population is going to revolt and kill them all. It's not going to happen. It's never happened in the 35 years that they've been doing QE. Why would you expect them to do it now? They're sitting on over $1 trillion worth of couple of $1 trillion worth of reserves. Why won't they spend them? And moreover, the Bank of Japan did not only QE, but QQE, meaning they bought both bonds and stocks. So as I said, when I started out thinking about this situation with Powell, for example, I said, it's really funny. At the June meeting, he raised the reverse repo rate 5 basis points to start draining the world. At the July meeting, again, no one talks about this. He set up the foreign repo facility so that foreign central banks had to go to the Fed at the Fed's cost of capital to go get, because they couldn't get it from the private markets. What did he do? He set up that I've got treasuries on the balance sheet. I've got a massive stock of money. If the market needs collateral, I give them treasuries. If the market needs money, I drain the reverse repo facility. At some point, he had both sides of the trade. Well, so does the Bank of Japan. They've got stocks, they've got bonds, they've got currency, they've got it all, and they can use all of those assets strategically to their advantage to bring the yen back to where they need it to lower their commodity input costs going forward, which is what they're going to do. You wait. Japan's going to go on a buying spree, on a commodity buying spree that's going to light your hair on fire. So is China, by the way. Because it makes perfect sense. Because as the yen has dropped, so has the yuan. As the yen has strengthened, so has the yuan. Not as much as the yen, but that's fine, because that actually takes some pressure off of China. China doesn't really want the yuan to strengthen too much. They can control the rate of ascent, right? And China generally manages the yuan versus basically the Asian Tiger Five: Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, not against the dollar. Okay, they've been doing this for a long time. If you go look at the real effective exchange rate of the Chinese yuan, you'll realize that it correlates a hell of a lot more to those five currencies than it does to the dollar. Okay, and the reason for that is because those countries provide China with the food and the timber and the copper and the tin and the nickel and all the things they need to run the economy. We're their export market.
That's interesting.
Their input costs are far more important to them than where they export to. Same thing with Japan.
I wanted to jump into SOFR, but this idea of just commodities seem to be the investment of choice for a lot of the sovereigns going forward. I just over and over and over again, I'm hearing that. Is this a transition to commodities being a reserve asset of these entities, or is it just?
I wouldn't go that far, because I think that's conflating things that don't. I mean, I've kind of heard that argument from people, and I just always like at the end of the day, I'm a Misesian. Like, if there's competing demand for an asset that's not monetary, So this is China may stockpile some copper, but that's not a reserve asset. That's a function of they're worried about war, or they're buying it on the
utilitarian.
It's utilitarian purely. It's not like they're going to go on the copper standard. Are you kidding?
Right.
No, they're buying gold.
Right.
For that purpose.
Well, sure.
They'll turn a blind eye to Bitcoin and let people accumulate.
But if you're gonna, so I mean, obviously, gold makes sense as a reserve asset for all the sovereigns. But if you're going to make a choice between, do we invest in a utilitarian future where we need to have multiple options for all these unforeseen potential scenarios, versus buying more treasuries?
Well, clearly, they're not going. No one's going to be buying a whole lot of treasuries. But I say that knowing full well that every time I look at the TIC report, Treasury International Capital Report, central banks have over $8 trillion with the U.S. Treasuries. They're still buying.
And I heard you talk about that. Do you think that has to do more with yield curve control, or
some of it?
Not, or I mean, what else? What else are they going to buy?
In Europe's case, it's absolutely, Paul. It's absolutely yield curve control. In the case of the rest of the world, and Brazil and the BRICS and China and Japan and everybody else, no, they're just managing their trade flows like what they're supposed to do. Right. Some of that, and what you're seeing is a diversification of their portfolio away from just U.S. Treasuries. They're buying other sovereign debt. They're buying gold. And maybe they're stockpiling some other assets, or they're buying, or they're making strategic investments in other countries, or whatever they're doing. I would, if I were a country that was a net energy importer, I don't know about you, but I'd be throwing a whole lot of money into, throwing off a dividend in barrels of oil,
right?
Kind of like what China's doing in Iraq, in Iran, Saudi Arabia, all the way down the line, Venezuela, Brazil. Come on, let's not get ourselves.
I mean, they're all preparing for a variety of outcomes in
Yeah,
a
and
complicated future.
yeah, and a complicated future where they don't necessarily need to use the dollar to settle the trade,
Right.
right? And
Right.
that's the thing, and that's the big thing. This is like the dollar is going to settle less and less trade, probably very slowly from here forward. That's
Mm-hmm.
fine. The world doesn't want to. The world doesn't want to hate the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is the thing that I think a lot of
Yeah.
hard money guys and a lot of Bitcoiners don't understand or refuse to accept. It's like, look, at the end of the day, there's if the U.S. stops weaponizing the dollar,
Right. Right. Well, that's
why would
so.
we stop using it? Like,
Right.
if
Well,
it's
that's
the cost of using it is cheap, that's great. But once you raise the
yeah.
cost
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
using it, once you sanction everybody out the ass, all you're doing is raising the cost of the threat of using dollars. I'm going to start doing other things. I mean, it doesn't make any sense
Yeah.
unless the people setting up the friggin' policy are a goal is to destroy the United States. Doesn't make any freaking sense otherwise. I mean, it literally doesn't.
Right.
Strategically, why are you doing that? That's bad for the dollar. Well, no. Oh, shut the fuck up. You're lying.
Right. We have that
You hate
happening.
the U.S. You're just a vandal. I got to
We
turn
have
my
that happening on this end. On this other end, like we just saw at Bitcoin 2024,
right.
stable coins, Tether was like in your face the entire time. Like
Mm-hmm.
most of these conversations, everything coming out of every political figure that went across stage was
Yep.
all about these stable coins.
Mm-hmm.
Cantor Fitzgerald is up there talking about the slew, billions and billions of treasuries they're buying on behalf of Tether.
Yep.
Everybody, for however you look at Wall Street, they might be saying, some might be very supportive of Bitcoin, others obviously not.
Right.
But everybody seems to be behind the stablecoin concept. This idea of this new buyer of treasuries and dollars spreading into the global south.
Mm-hmm.
So, and at the same time, I'm looking at that saying to myself, wait a minute, we just spent my entire lifetime, the last 50 years, torturing the South, extracting their resources, making sure they can never get ahead, burying them with economic hitman. And now all of a sudden, hey, we're the savior. Right. So, yeah, we're here to help you out. You've got these horrible currencies. We can give you the dollar, download the app, and here you go.
Right.
Right. This is just another sort of weaponizing, right, of the dollar but making it look like we're the savior. Right. You talked about this in your recent newsletter with the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Oh,
right.
God. You've already read this month's issue. Wow.
Yeah. Right. We blow them up and then we go in there and we rebuild them.
Right.
We've just spent the last 5 years blowing up Latin America, and now we're here to save the day. And all of a sudden, I see Malay rising to power, Nayib Bukele rising to power. They're all supportive of the dollar. They're all supportive of this Bitcoin USD stablecoin / relationship. How do you view this? Am I on a Tom Luongo track here? Or?
Yeah, no, you are. I think you are. I didn't really think about the whole Bitcoin Tether thing much beyond the fall or early on. I said what I started seeing was, and this tracks with what I said all throughout 2021 and 2022 when stablecoin after stablecoin after stablecoin mysteriously just blew up overnight.
Mm-hmm.
When FTX blew up on election night, by the way, that was the Fed executing FTX after the Democrats stole 20 House seats. Okay. I said that like literally that night. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, it was such a political event. It was unbelievable.
Right. Now, why? And I said, no, note what's happening here. Go back to when Letitia James gave Tether a slap on the wrist in Southern District of New York, which is owned and operated by who? Wall Street. Right. I said, isn't that interesting? Oh, so Tether's been chosen as the stable coin of choice to keep Bitcoin liquefied.
Yeah, they came out anointed out of that meeting.
They came out anointed. And lo and behold, Tether's balance sheet is mostly U.S. Treasuries, a little bit of gold, a little bit of Bitcoin. And what was interesting was I was talking with somebody the other day, or read something the other day. I can't remember where it is, and I apologize to the person who put this idea in my head that I can't give them credit for because it's not something that I thought of on my own, right? Which is that, do you remember when there was the run on Tether? Oh, it was like most of the Tether FUD was coming out of, was it CZ Binance
Yeah.
or
Well, that was
was it?
along with FTX.
Yeah,
CZ was putting they tried to execute a run on Tether, but Tether handled it without any problem.
that's what I'm getting at, right? And from what I understand now, it's come to light that the 90% of the Tether FUD that's been out there for going back to 2016, 2017 has been promulgated by specific individuals who, of course, they wanted to be their competitor,
Mm-hmm.
and that Tether was actually always going to wind up being exactly where it is, which is the thing that would be a sump, a hot sink, a heat sink for flow of treasuries.
Yeah.
Like, I look at Tether today as like the marginal treasury flow
Right.
in the market, and Bitcoin, and when Bitcoin is trading stably, all right, like you just watch Tether's market cap, and you can see a couple of $1 billion here and there flowing into Tether, and it's mostly going to be short-term bills.
Right.
Like, this is part of the reason why Janet Yellen's yield curve control has failed, because all that happened was that she kept issuing all these bills to pay the budget, because she's trying to suppress the long end of the curve and
Mm-hmm.
keep the short end of the curve low in price, high in yield, and to suppress the long end of the curve to keep the 210 spread wide. And what happened? A lot of that money just flowed into Tether, like all the marginal flow. So she couldn't like manipulate price the way she wanted to. What eventually they had to do was just outright just start buying the long end of the curve, which is what she's been doing, which was the proximate event as to why the U.S. 10-year, hit 4.75% a couple of months ago, and now is trading at 3.8. That was a coordinated action by the ECB, the BOJ, the BOE, sorry, not the BOJ, the BOE, Bank of England, probably the SNB, the Swiss National Bank to a lesser extent, and just the market in general. Because
So you think that's where the bulk of the treasury buying has been coming from, to try and suppress that long end of that curve?
You can see it on the Treasury International Capital Report when you break it down by region, right? And I've talked about this many times in the past, but I've broken it down basically into 3 regions: Asia Pacific, the rest of the world, and Europe, or EU adjacent, whatever you want to call it. And the interesting part about that is, guess who's now like the biggest holder of U.S. Treasury bonds? Guess.
Bank of England.
Yes. The Bank of England owns nearly $800 billion.
They have the most to lose, no?
They have to do this.
They have to,
because they've got to control gilt rates. This is where we start talking about what my friend Alex Craner's been putting out, and you should have Alex on the podcast to talk about this, to talk about his latest thesis about what's going on with Ukraine debt, the Bank of England, and I just published the podcast that he and I did the other day on this, like about 15 minutes before we hit record this morning, before I jumped into this call. But we recorded Tuesday afternoon on this. And, I first heard him talk about it on Vanessa Beeley's podcast the day before. I then brought him on to chat with him about it and then interject, as Alex was going through it all, it was very obvious to me that it all fit perfectly into everything that I've been saying. That it's actually the missing link as to why we need to have more war in Ukraine, why why this is such an existential threat, and why they're clamping, to Alex's point, why they're clamping down in England, Germany, France, and all the rest of them. They know they're going to default now. Why the European Union and Yellen have been so insistent about transferring seized Russian foreign exchange assets to Ukraine, giving it to Ukraine. Why? It's to pay the bondholders off that are getting stiffed because the Ukraine's in default. Mm-hmm. So those billions of dollars that they want to steal from the Russians, they want to give it to Ukraine to pay the bondholders off, because now they don't think Ukraine can win the war and force Russia to pay reparations, which is the exact model they ran in World War I.
Right.
And forcing Germany to pay off their World War I debt for the next 90 years. Oh, by the way, like, it's time for all of these people to go away. The world would be such a better place if it wasn't for these feckless, inbred European people. I'm done. I don't care
Yeah,
what their
no.
ethnicity is. Ultimately, I'm just done.
Yeah,
I don't care.
we're with you. We're with you. It's hard because so many people, there's such a massively complicated topic to when you're the water cooler guy and you're just telling people the way this shit really works. They look at you like you're batshit crazy,
They
right?
look at you,
And
you got 4 heads.
yeah, so without the desire, right? Without that general public's desire to really get to the bottom of the rabbit hole,
Right.
how do you convince them it's anything other than evil Putin wanting more resources?
Or even worse, that it's all one big club and we're not in it.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
this is my problem. I mean, I'll be honest with you. This is my problem with a lot of commentary that's out there. It's not nuanced enough.
Right.
Like, I worked a long time and did a lot of looking in the mirror, not just doing by looking at my face while doing a podcast, but looking in the mirror and going, what do you actually believe? What's the world you actually want to live in, and what's the world that you got? In all the years that I early on, when I didn't have an audience, I was just doing crazy live streams on YouTube and to 30 or 40 or 50 people ranting into a microphone. I kept saying over and over again, there's the world I want and there's the world I've got. Those are two radically different things.
Yeah.
Right. And I have to assess the world I got from the perspective of the world I want, and how do I get from A to B? And that's going to lead you to very uncomfortable questions, especially if you're if you need, and I get why people need this. I've needed it in my life. I'm not denigrating anybody for needing things to be simple and for just, you know what? I don't care. Just get rid of these people. Like, no, unfortunately, they're not going away.
I think
they're not going to go away without a fight. And we have to figure out how you can make deals with them and, use them as temporary assets, the same way they use you as temporary asset.
Yeah. I think, obviously I don't speak for the whole Bitcoin community, but I think at large, the Bitcoin community kind of feels the same way. We want to build the future that we want to see. We're sick and tired of yelling at the system.
Yes.
With no change, just saying, screw it. We're going to build the future. And we're not perfect by any means, right? We've got a lot to learn. We're growing up. We're a small movement. But we have that same goal in mind. And so that's why I think the Bitcoin community has gravitated to you so quickly, because you just want the good ideas.
Right.
You don't give a shit how we got there.
Well,
let's just focus on the good ideas.
I get a lot of pushback from Bitcoin maxis. Let's not kid ourselves. I also call them religious fundamentalists because,
well, there's different degrees. I'm a Bitcoin. I consider myself a Bitcoin maxi, but you know what I mean.
It's like one of those things. I get it. And again,
but at that core, right? At the core, the Bitcoin libertarian values of like, we just want freedom. Do whatever the fuck you want to do if we all have freedom.
Right.
And let's try and build a better world that's better for this pro humanity.
What's really interesting is that, we get into these I turned a corner on libertarian thought very, very early on in the process. Right. The first reaction is the adolescent, fuck you, you can't do, I won't do what you tell me. There's that, right? And fine. And that's a good start. That's where you need to be. You need to be a little ungovernable, folks. You need to be a little disagreeable. You need to, whatever level of disagreeableness you have in your 5 pillars of personality, cultivate that. And if that means lifting some weights and eating some meat in order to get your testosterone levels up, okay, do whatever you need to do. Whatever you need to do to get up for the game, Powerade, the old Powerade ads, right? Fine. But at the end of the day, one of the things that I really took away from the Mises crowd, is that anarchy is not chaos.
Right.
Anarchy actually is a very polite society, because the risks of crossing someone or reneging on a contract are so immense. In a system where there ain't no bailout coming, there ain't no big brother coming to give you a hand. You have to survive on your wits. While at a societal level, there are certainly problems with how you get from there to where you are to where you're going to go. How you reinforce good behavior over time is very difficult. Right. And this is not something, as I'd like to say in the past, this is not something you're going to get with the current crop of humans that are out there. Okay.
Right. And it's not something.
Right.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. I was gonna
No,
say
go
I
right
don't
ahead.
think it's something you can get with large with large states, right? Like in a small fractional, very decentralized, multi-state world
Mm-hmm.
where we might have thousands of sovereign states.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think these small communities can live in a libertarian fashion. If you
Well,
start to apply that to 350 million people, it's a whole other story, right?
Well, again, and this is the thing. So this is a process by which you're going to work through this, and then you have to realize that everybody is, emotionally abused, and
Mm-hmm.
we're all working through the trauma of our own childhoods and the world and having lived through this world and building up all the defense mechanisms and building up all the this is the problem that doesn't solve itself in a generation or two or
Yeah.
three or
Yeah.
10 or 20. It's something that happens and evolves over the course of hundreds of years,
Yeah.
multiple generations. When I first got into the libertarian community back in 2002, 2003, and I was chatting with some people about like some of the Native American tribes and how they were organized. They were all very, very anarchic, but they were all had ruthless respect for private property to the point where they didn't feel the need to write down their property deeds, for example, on Vancouver Island, on anything other than a pencil on a 3x5 card. Yeah, that guy owns it. Oh, yeah, and then when we change ownership, we'll just erase him and we'll write the other guy's name on here, and we all agree that this is a contract. Like when I heard shit like this, I'm like, yeah, we're so far from that. We're not going to get there anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that the basic idea theoretically isn't something you should strive for. So how do you go step by step, bit by bit? How can you fix this little thing or that little thing or this little
Yeah.
thing? I've always said that every voluntary interaction between humans is a fundamentally anarchic event. Just build on them as best
Yep.
you can.
Yep.
And try not to get involved in forcing yourself on other people as best you can. You're going to, and you have to live with the fact that you're going to do things in your life you're not proud of or whatever, and you're going to make a choice between two bad outcomes, and that may
Mm-hmm.
be, and let's when I say something like that, obviously we can apply the election to it, and yeah, from a libertarian perspective, is Donald Trump or Kamala Harris acceptable? No, neither of them are. Hell, to half of Trump supporters, he's not
Try
acceptable to them.
try
But
running a try running a Bitcoin company in under U.S. regulation. Talk
yeah,
about the lesser of two evils on every decision you make.
mm-hmm.
Right.
I've spoken to Caitlin Long about this multiple times. I know how
Yeah.
I get it, and so but that doesn't mean you can't vote strategically for yourself. That doesn't
Yep.
mean you can't assess public figures from from your own personal strategic level. So I look at Jerome Powell. I make funny memes about the guy, and I let him go and do his thing, knowing full well that what he's doing is protecting Wall Street.
Yeah.
He's also
Yeah.
probably making decisions sometimes that he doesn't want to make because that's the political reality of the world he lives in.
Yeah. Exactly.
And let's put it this way: I'll give you let's use a different metaphor or a different circumstance. When I had somebody say to me once, I yell at traffic a lot. I'm sure you'll be shocked to hear that I yell at traffic, right? And somebody said to me one day, he said, you should usually assume that everybody on the road in front of you is driving with a cake in their lap. If you do that, you might have a different perspective on why they act the way they do behind the wheel of a car. And then your driving habits may improve, and you may just like take your blood pressure down a little bit and go, yeah, I'm going to get there 30 seconds or a minute later than I want to. And yes, this person's an idiot, but as opposed to getting triggered by it or getting angry about it and then the whole 9 yards and wasting energy yelling about it, why don't you assume that they're doing their best under these circumstances? Maybe if you use that metaphor
Right.
for the Fed chairman at this moment in time, if Powell had not raised rates to 5.5%, right? It was funny. I was chatting with Bob Murphy the other day about this kind of thing. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I had never met Bob before. So I wasn't sure what I was going to get. And what I got was a very pragmatic, responds, about all this stuff, going, yeah, like he got it as well. And I was expecting kind of the more doctrinaire Austrian, kind of Rudy Havenstein version of reality, right? And I know Rudy. I've interviewed him a couple of times. I've chatted with him a couple of times, and I know that he's mostly doing that because that's his public persona that he wants to put forth. But at the same time, like,
and we love it. We love it.
I love Rudy. He's
Yeah,
a wonderful soul. He's an absolutely beautiful human being. I adore Rudy. Like, but at the same time, I look at it and I say that I can't be that guy. I have to. Yeah. I can't be that guy anymore. I have to be the guy that says, yeah, no, that's a perspective. And 75% of the time I'm with you, but this 25% of the time I can't be there. And, right. But and there's a reason for that. And there's a real good, solid reason for those things. It being a little bit more generous, and because if you do that, you might find something really wonderful every once in a while, which is that maybe somebody out there actually trying to do good work in the best of the circumstances. And then, whoa, well, does that mean that this, and this? Possibly. Let's watch it. And so somehow I went from Jerome Powell and the banks to, well, let's see what happens here. Let's see if the banks are putting pressure on people in Congress to stop the spending bills. Oh, look, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema show up and torch Build Back Better and destroy Nancy Pelosi's speakership and all of this stuff. And you're like, yeah, okay, I guess I'm right about this.
Yeah, no, you've been dead on.
But again, I've had a lot of help, but over the years, I want you to understand that you don't do this in a vacuum, right? You don't. I've got a brilliant business partner in Dexter White who's taught me unbelievable amounts about how to read the game board, especially domestic policy. I've got a huge and amazing community of people who are so energized and so inspired to do good work that they just bring the world to me and help me kind of synthesize it.
Awesome.
But, it is what it is. So, okay, well, next question. I guess we'll...
All right.
I told you it was going to be an easy interview. I'm just going to chat along.
It's all good. I want to take you back to SOFR.
Sure.
Because I think I understand the reasoning behind moving to SOFR, but it happened so far, like the decision to go to SOFR was so far ahead of the COVID crisis in 2021 and this everything with, so like to have that sort of vision, like, is this a happy accident? Was this engineered well in advance?
I think that once Wall Street realized that they had Trump in power, they saw their opportunity. Okay. SOFR was a moat in the Fed's eye for like 10 years, but Obama and Geithner wouldn't bring it to the table.
Right. That's when it first came. The first that I heard about it, I think, was during the whole great financial crisis, the LIBOR scams, and then SOFR was on the radar and then kind of disappeared and then came back.
Obama being the globalist, the good Davosian that he is, Geithner being the good Davosian that he is, right? They just Yellen, they ignored it. So here's 2017, and we've got Trump in power. We got Mnuchin at Treasury. Not that Mnuchin was any great shakes at Treasury, but he's better than Yellen. But all of a sudden, the Fed saw their opportunity, and whoever put Powell in Trump's ear said, no, you need to put this guy in charge of the Fed. Now, Trump being Trump didn't realize that what was happening here. Because if Trump loves cheap money, he's a mercantilist at heart. He believes in cheap money and protection tariffs. Excuse me. But at a certain level as well, like, we had to get off the zero bound. And we had to change the monetary system. Honestly, the best thing you could possibly do to MAGA was implement SOFR. You had to finally cut the cord between the United States and City of London, who had been controlling, influencing far in excess of what they should have been, the American financial system for 200 years, 240 years. I'm dead serious. And I've written about it in the newsletter. First starting with, and it was Richard Poe actually that put some of these ideas in my head. talking about the trade balance between the United States and Europe, and then when that era ended, and then we moved into post-Reconstruction, and the United States started running a trade surplus versus Europe, which was what ultimately built, the America that we're still living off the corpse of, by the way. And then after World War II, we started running a trade deficit with Europe as we started recapitalizing Europe. So all the money so in effect, if you marry that with some of Martin Armstrong's arguments, you've got like, hey, during the 20s, all the money flowed out of Europe because Europe was a mess, and it all flowed into the United States. And they capitalized, and they built the United States. They built the war machine in the United States. They invested in it to fight World War II. And then after World War II, all the money flowed out again. They still control the friggin' money because it's still their money. It's just here in our banks. And then that money flowed back to Europe to rebuild Europe. And then eventually, we wound up going off the gold standard in 71. Within a few years, we had LIBOR taking over literally the entire globe for debt indexing. So let's talk about that. So what is LIBOR? It was a debt indexing rate. It was a cost of capital rate. So you wanted to borrow dollars and overseas, and you're a Greek, famously you're a Greek shipbuilder or whatever, and you want to borrow dollars. Oh, what rates for that? Do we have a rate for that? No. And then eventually, well, how about 5%? Or somebody else says, some French guy says, how about I'll sell you dollars for 4%. I got all these dollars sitting in my French my bank account over, I don't know, BNP Paribas or whatever. And then some Dutch guy over at ING says, well, hell, I'll give you 3.5%. And then London says I can go 3.25, and then 3.1, and boom. By 1984, we have LIBOR. And what's LIBOR? 18 City of London banks sitting around deciding on what the cost of dollars will be. And so here's the thing. And this is the conceptual, I think, the hard part for people to wrap their heads around, why this is so important. And why they were actually in control of U.S. monetary policy. Okay? Because it's easy to understand once you're at the zero bound because money is infinite. Money is free, right? But start coming out of the Volcker years at 13.5%, right? And successively we go down and down and down and down in rates. And for 40 plus years, we have a bull market in U.S. Treasuries. And so every time the economy expands, we go through a bull, the Fed raises rates to stop the bull, brings the prices down, and then the cost of capital down. But why do they have to do that? They have to start cutting rates early because as the money is going out, it's getting levered up overseas at a cost they're lending far beyond their means, and they're using the knowledge that the Fed is going to cut before they're short-circuiting the natural clearing cycle of the bust cycle, the clearing of the malinvestment from a Misesian point of view, right? So when that happens, and say let's just use a made-up example. Say the Fed has to raise to 6%, 7%, let's call it 7%. And they need to hold, and in order to clear the malinvestment, they need to hold it there for 2 years, right? But about a year into that process, 7% is now strangling Europe. They've over levered the previous cycle. They're stuck and they're running, and they're all going to go bust if we hold at 7% for another year. So the rate on LIBOR starts to blow out. The cost of overnight money starts to rise. That forces everybody's bank because everybody's scrambling around for dollars. So the bid for dollars goes up. People who have dollars are demanding a higher rate of return for borrowing dollars in the overnight markets. What happens? That blows out. Crisis starts to ensue. Margin calls start to happen. What does the Fed do? Well, the Fed, that's there. Now, when the LIBOR starts to blow out, everybody's credit cards, everybody's credit revolvers, their HELOCs, their adjustable rate mortgages, all of that stuff is indexed to LIBOR. Now, the United States economy can weather 7% far longer than the European economy can, or the British economy can weather 7%, right? But LIBOR blows out, and induces a slowdown in the United States economy far earlier than it should, a year into the liquidation phase as opposed to 2 years. You short circuit that malinvestment site, the malinvestment clearing, go back to 4%, which recapitalizes the Eurodollar markets, and we do the cycle all over again, and that's why interest rates keep going down and down and down until we get to the zero bound, until the whole thing blows up. Which is predictable, which Mises would call that the crack up boom. Now, SOFR says, sorry, we're in charge of the dollar. It's based on repo transactions within the domestic markets in the United States. Now, only if the United States has a big slowdown will the demand for money rise above the Fed funds rate, which would then go overseas.
Mm-hmm.
The cost gets borne outwards as opposed to coming back this way. Okay, that's the key to understanding why this was so important.
This really helps. This really helps me understand the anti-globalist perspective here now, right? Because now we're saying it's our dollar, it's your problem.
Yes, it used to be our dollar's your problems. Now it's our, and the rest of the world is now saying, as Zoltan Pozar said, our commodity is your problem.
Yeah,
and the U.S. is saying, under Powell is saying, that's fine. We're taking our dollars and we're going home. It's okay. We're good with that. If you still want to use dollars, go right ahead, but it's going to cost you 5%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah.
LIBOR officially ends.
That paints a. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
LIBOR officially ends on September 30th. Will no longer be quoted. Effectively, no new contracts have been written in LIBOR for months now, and certainly not in the United States.
Meaning it ends globally or ends just in the United States?
Again,
ends
it's going
globally.
away. It will not be quoted anymore. Everything will be quoted as a function of SOFR, plus or minus 30% to SOFR. So unsecured debt, I mean, LIBOR will still exist conceptually, but it will be on a contract for contract basis. It won't be. And my friends, my Italian friends over at Montalcino, Marco and others over there were arguing, I think correctly, that what this does is going to ensure that why do dollars or anything need to flow? Why does foreign exchange need to flow through London anymore?
Right.
Why? Why can't it flow through Dubai or go back to New York anywhere. Or why does it need to go through London?
Right.
Because these banks don't matter anymore.
That's interesting. So, I mean, really, you're painting a picture where Jerome Powell pulls this one lever, and it throws the entire, the entire globalist system into chaos.
Yep.
Is that why we're seeing such a ramp up in the chaos?
Yes.
I mean, like,
yes.
Right.
Yes. I
mean, he does
that's
this.
That's why they're threatening us with nuclear war, Paul.
Right.
Okay? Like
exactly.
It's, and famine and death and disease and COVID and
monkeypox,
monkeypox and and just killing chickens left and right. Oh, we found a chicken with bird flu. Bird flu happens every year.
Right.
And now they're just wholesale slaughtering millions of chickens in order to stop bird flu. It's all bull crap. Yes. They're trying to destroy the food supply. They want to kill us all. They hate us.
Right.
They hate you. Okay. It's like my friend Picanones, another kind of post-libertarian. At least that's what he calls himself. It's like, look, I would rather choose to be ruled by a bunch of technocrats that are indifferent to my existence rather than hostile to it.
Yeah.
And this is where we fundamentally disagree, like at a practical, pragmatic level, disagree with Whitney Webb. To be honest.
I'd like to hear more about that.
Because I think Whitney doesn't see any quantitative or qualitative difference between them. And I'm like, that's from a doctrinaire libertarian perspective. That makes perfect sense. But the world isn't doctrinaire libertarian. Like there's 50 of you.
Sure. She's really, really great. I love the way Whitney connects all the dots.
Sure.
And has all the receipts, but it's missing a lot of the context.
And I say all of that with respect and honestly,
absolutely,
with love.
She's an integral part to us learning how all this shit works.
Of course. But there comes the point where you have to ask yourself, what does it all mean? And can you really say that these people are all the same? I ran into this. You
If
know,
people can
just
change
because
their
they
mind
use
as
the
well.
phrase, just because they say use the same word, they use the same words, or they're doing the same, or they're doing similar things, doesn't mean that they want the same goals.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't for a moment think that Elon Musk isn't more of a free speech guy than Klaus Schwab. Is he
Mm-hmm.
is he a truly First Amendment kind of guy, understands it at its functional level? No. Is he getting there? Maybe. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Was he
Yeah.
a bad guy 10 years ago? Probably.
Or was he the guy driving with the cake in his lap because he had to make Tesla profitable? He had to get SpaceX off the ground. Like,
Or is he really
he
like,
had some very difficult situations. He had to deal with some people he had to negotiate with in order to stay alive, right?
and to Whitney's argument, he said, well, why did you take the money in the first place? And I would say, well, I would invoke the Walter Block or the Murray Rothbard or some other doctrinaire libertarian big light who would say, oh, by the way, every dollar the government has is stolen money that they stole from you. I'm just trying to figure out how to get it back.
Yeah.
So, and if I want to build a world if I want to build a parallel world to these guys, again, I don't have any problem with Bitcoin companies going out and taking government money to build a Bitcoin company. Like, to me, that's completely friggin' moral. You're getting ill-gotten, stolen goods, and you're turning around and you're getting it back and building a system then building a decentralized system that's not governmental and that's not totalitarian. So I can construct an argument. I'm not saying this is true, guys. I'm not here to issue an apologia for Peter Thiel and Palantir, for example. What I'm saying is, it's one possible interpretation as to why Thiel and company built Palantir, but they still hold the keys to Palantir.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what are they going to do with it? I don't know. Are they going to be the good guys? Are they going to be the dragons we have to slay 30 years from now?
Right.
Probably.
Right.
But I'd rather them being indifferent to us today than have these unbelievably hostile old frickin' pedophiles trying to kill us all today. They're hostile to us. Like, this is, and I know that that's hard for a lot of people to deal with that level of complexity. I get it. It's hard. It implies that you have to get really dirty.
Mm-hmm.
You have to,
and that everything's gray,
Yeah,
nothing's black and white,
and everything's a little gray, and and that doesn't mean you're compromising your principles. It means you're applying them in ways that other people look down that aren't willing to do.
Yeah.
I've never been the guy to go and take government money and go build that thing. That's not me. But I absolutely understand that argument. It's why Murray Rothbard voted for Pat Buchanan. It's why I've literally heard, the extreme libertarian arguments used to be things like, well, I'm not going to take my Social Security when it comes to work. I won't take unemployment when I lose my job. I'm like, oh no, I took unemployment. And I went, absolutely, I'm taking unemployment for as long as they're going to pay me to take unemployment because they stole the money from me in the first place and I want it back.
Mm-hmm.
I had no problem doing that. Like, well, you're an anarcho-capitalist. Yeah, exactly. And they stole money from me, and I want it back. Well, that's just shut up. Shut the fuck up. Like, seriously, shut the fuck up. These people have stolen 30% of my wealth for the last 45 years of my life. I've been working since I'm 11. I think I'm allowed to go, grab back 180 a week from the state of Florida.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, fuck off.
Yeah, I hear you. So technocrats, this is actually one of the topics I wanted to talk to you about.
Sure.
They're coming out of the woodwork, right? Yesterday, Mark Zuckerberg apologizing for COVID censorship, Elon making a massive transition into supporting free speech. I mean, he's always stood up for his companies, but now he seems to be standing up for humanity at large. Which, kudos to him. I had a hard time trusting that in the beginning. I mean, as any, yeah, right. You still have to second guess everything. But every day that it persists, I'm a little bit more on the pro Elon.
Like I said,
camp.
It's the same thing with Jerome Powell. Same thing with dude. same thing with Jamie Dimon. Like, is Dimon going to go out there and make a deal with Davos to go make some money for JP Morgan? Yeah. Is Jamie Dimon going to advocate to Powell to say, oh, by the way, I'm stealing this money from Klaus Schwab, but raise interest rates to 6% anyway. Like, I can see him doing both of those things like before lunch.
Yeah.
Like, my 11:15 is I talk to Powell. My 11:15 I talk to this guy and I screw him over. And 11:30 I talk to Powell and then screw some other guy over. Like, I don't ascribe like morals to these people. They have the morals of friggin' sea slugs. What are you kidding me?
Yeah.
But
so when I look back at COVID and other eras, I see what you describe as the informational industrial complex as the demoralization campaign agents, right? The delivery of the agents of delivering that. I also now see AI coming on the scene, which is like throwing jet fuel on the demoralization campaign fire.
Yep. Still trying to.
But simultaneously, I see these execs, and I don't quite trust them yet, right? I don't know if it's just for show, if it's just for the face of the company, or if it's really true that they're rethinking the censorship apparatus.
I don't trust Mark Zuckerberg as far as I can throw him, but I can tell you that if he's trying to bend the knee, two things. One, they're now hedging their bets about a Trump victory. That's one.
Right.
Two, that's the big one. That's the obvious one. The second is someone's told him that, oh, by the way, we can take Facebook out. It's not like the very people that made Facebook, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, or the book runners on the original IPO own a shit ton of Facebook stock. Like, if you don't think that they don't like have Zuckerberg by the short and curly, data by the short and curlies, you're crazy. Like, there comes up. So again, I know a lot of the criticisms I've heard of my arguments about the banks, about the big banks on Wall Street. And I'll tell you this: it's like, well, if they felt this, why didn't they do anything about this before 2017? Because they couldn't. Because Davos had political and monetary control, and they have a fiduciary interest to their shareholders ultimately. And if this is the battlefield and you can't win, do you charge the light brigade into the abyss and go, see, I'm a martyr for the cause? Or do you keep everything going and live to fight another day? Or do your best under this is my problem with the unnuanced look at it. This guy was a bad guy in the past, therefore he's still a bad guy today.
That makes total.
What are we all 12?
Right. This makes total sense. This makes total sense. If your analysis is right, Jerome's pulling the interest rate lever. It's essentially draining finance from the globalists. You have if Wall Street is sitting here at the same time saying, "Hey, man, this DEI thing, this global reset thing, not so good for us. We need to be maybe taking the reins back here. We got Jerome on our side. We got SOFR on our side. Let's now put pressure on the technocracy to join us, or the carrot and the stick." Because immediately after, and we'll get into this hopefully too, immediately after the Trump assassination attempt is when the voices changed.
Yep.
And
because they all knew, everybody knew that Trump was going to be killed in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
It was the worst kept secret in DC, Brussels, London, Wall Street. Everybody fucking knew. Whether they knew or they didn't know, they knew something was going to happen. Yeah. And clearly they were all acting this way. They can read it. Look, it's not like Zuckerberg that can't read people's body language. And Ursula von der Leyen is walking around like cock of the fucking walk. You don't think she knows? Okay? Like David Cameron, all these freaking people, they all knew. They all told you they knew. Don't worry about Trump. He won't be around anyway. I mean, everybody thought, they're going to put him in jail. No, they're going to kill him. So, the timing on it was perfect, and all of that. So at some point, then he survives. right? And I've said this on multiple podcasts. I'm not a particularly religious person, but
I don't know how else you can look at it. Like
hard.
the only other way you can look at it is that it was a setup, and that's so unfathomable. Like, who's going to say take a
so
shot
fucking
and just miss me, right? Like, that's never going to happen.
That's so fake and gay. It's the
Yeah.
Okay. FYI, cope is one letter removed from hope, which is one letter removed from mope. Like, fuck off. Like, this is not tough. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just look.
It's I mean, it's unfathomable. It's obvious that that poor kid was put on that roof as the patsy.
Yep.
I don't think he took the shot.
Oh, I do actually. I think he took the
You
shot.
do? You do?
Yeah. I'm
I mean, because I've heard.
Yeah, I've heard, and early on, I'm like, yeah, there's no way there's more than one shooter, or there's only one shooter. Blah 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 blah. The more we looked at it, I think the more it's obvious that no, this is what happened.
You think there was one shooter?
I think it was him. I think it's not a really difficult shot. I don't think. I mean,
well, I give you that. I give you that.
And the kid, and just a series of events occurred, Keystone Cop style, orgy of incompetence, that means we're talking about an organized conspiracy. When there's that much incompetence, incompetence doesn't cut it at that point. As an explanatory as to how events work themselves out, and we got lucky.
Yeah, we got lucky.
And and we should be able to. And look, and that is also a hard thing for a lot of people to accept. Hey, we got lucky. Assassination attempts fail all the time. Robert Fico's still alive in Slovakia. Viktor Orban's still alive in Hungary.
Right.
Putin's still alive. Like these people have all been targeted multiple times in the past. This one was perfect, and the shot missed. And then things happen. And
do you think it's waking? Do you think it's waking a number of people up?
I mean, Trump's response was epic in a way that was, I'm an easy cry, like at movies and all this stuff, because I'm so angry most of the time about everything that when I see anything like edifying about humanity, it just like breaks my fucking heart, right?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, I mean,
I totally relate.
Yeah, it's like I spend most of my day in free floating hostility about the state of the world, and I sit down and watch a fucking anime, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm in trouble. Okay, here we go. Watching an episode of Cowboy Bebop the other night, and I was like, oh fuck, this hits hard. But yeah, the complexity is the hard part,
right?
Of just saying, look, shit happened. Sometimes it goes your way. Man. Sometimes they fail. Yeah. Even though it's perfect. It doesn't just happen in the movies.
You think they're done with that?
No, I do not. I think they're going to try again. I don't think Trump has a clear path to inauguration. I think they've got 8. I think there's at least 14 different ways they're going to try and screw with the fact that he's not going to make it to the election, to the inauguration. They'll invoke the Electoral College. They'll try and decertify certain states to ensure that nobody gets a majority. They're going to do everything procedural that you're seeing Emmanuel Macron do in France. I think France is a model for what they're going to do because they've done it everywhere else. So why wouldn't they do it here?
So we end up we get to a point where if he survives all that, then we get to the election. The chaos that could ensue if we're actually having an election with Trump on the ballot. Mm-hmm. And I kind of I look at the UK, I look at the riots in Europe, I look back to what the Black Lives Matter activities that we had during COVID. And it paints a picture where things could get really chaotic really fast, either pre or post election.
Oh yeah.
Well, how do you?
I have no crystal ball for this.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna,
other than it's all up in the air.
Yeah. Right. It's all up in the air. I mean, dude, at this point, I'm literally listening to my friends who are heavily into astrology.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly. Why not? Like,
Why not?
I
I'm
mean,
with you, man.
I mean, and I don't mean that I believe in this shit. Like, no, I'm just like, I don't know what to believe at this point. Like,
A lot of those people that I've listened to are pointing to he's going to win the election.
I think he's going to win the election. I think it's his to lose. I think him bringing in RFK, brilliant move. I think him bringing in Tulsi Gabbard, brilliant move. I think he's going to bring in more people. I think, like, I was thinking about this. This is the most contentious election since 1860, right? This is the most consequential election since 1860. 1860 was a similarly fractured environment. You had 4 people running for president and who got electoral votes in the election of 1860. Now, it was Lincoln's to lose, or it was Lincoln versus Douglas, because the South was split and all the electoral votes were up north anyway, right? So, people forget that, I only just remembered this. I only just reacquainted myself with this last night as I was working on some other stuff. And, John Breckinridge and John Hill had no chance at like winning. They were splitting the vote. Douglas got beaten by Lincoln in every state except Missouri. Lincoln won the election. But he only won the election with 39% of the vote. Keir Starmer just won a supermajority in Britain with 33.5% of the vote. He is the most unpopular prime minister in modern times. Britain's this close to an Oliver Cromwell moment, especially if there's any kind of debt implosion, as my good friend Alex Craner is talking about. And all the pieces are in place for someone to push the UK over the edge and the ECB over the edge. So, is this a game of chicken? Because why do you think the British told the Ukrainians to go into Kursk and to preclude the Russians ever coming to the peace table now? Why is this happening?
It's existential for these powers that be.
It's absolutely existential for them.
Which is why they're so dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's never anything more dangerous than a cornered animal.
Yep, absolutely. And they're so you get to sort of as I think through these possibilities. If Trump won the election, I absolutely believe that they would try and throw us into massive financial chaos.
I think they're going to do that before the election.
You think happens. Before? Okay.
Oh yeah. I think I think we should be looking forward to an October surprise, especially after the end of IBOR as a potential way of looking at it. Why is the first weekend in October always seems to be the new panic? Right. Well, it's because it's the first week of Q4. Right. So everybody changes their investment strategy. They start going into tax loss strategy and this and that and everything else, and everybody makes a decision. Now, on election years, that can be manipulated. We've got a month before that even happens. This is any number of other ways that this can go sideways. So, but the thing is that, and here's the thing. In order to take down the U.S. at this point, they have to take everybody else down worse. And then,
and Europe
and
would.
Then, my point is, the thing I'm going to say is this: Powell understands this. Powell sold all the banks. Don't be afraid of using the repo window, or the discount window. We're taking the stigma away from you. We're going to force you to do it once a year, just so everybody's been to the discount window at least once in the last 12 months, so that the market takes that stigma away. We're trying to allow it to be used as the tool that it is supposed to be. And we have still 14,000 banks in the United States. Brits have 5. 90% of all deposits, according to Alex, are 5 at 5 major banks in England. So, when you And then same thing in Germany, same thing in France, same thing in Italy. It's just like if they take if something happens overseas, right? Is it going to translate across the pond? Of course it is. It's too big a market, too big a problem. But does it have to be the same level that we've seen in the past? No, it doesn't, because we have more options and we have more flexibility in our financial system than everyone else does. Mm-hmm. And we've been gaslit into believing that we don't.
So that's
the part I want to remind everybody.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Because if you don't believe I'm correct about that, then why was Powell able to hold 5.5% for a year and a half and raise a quarter point during the worst banking crisis in the United States since 2008?
Right. Exactly. Nobody
put
thought
his balls on the table and went, "Fuck you, I'm raising rates."
And nobody thought we'd be able to make it through this high of interest rates. Nobody.
Even I didn't think that. I just said that we had to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's surprising how well the U.S. economy handled it.
But part of it is,
but maybe it's just us thinking,
the Biden
looking backwards,
spent so much freaking money.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay, so that's a great lead into my next question here.
Sure, okay.
So we look into a future, in the not too distant future here, financial chaos, maybe starting somewhere in Europe, and maybe a big bank in Europe goes under. We get contagion. We get financial crisis in the United States.
Sure.
The historical response would be rates to zero, print.
Mm-hmm.
What does this reaction look like to you in this new world, in this new SOFR environment, in this new interest rate environment?
I don't think Powell goes back to the zero bound.
Okay.
But
you think the reaction is similar, just not as intense?
I think he may go back to 3%.
Okay.
Which is what the market is expecting him to do. Wouldn't that be a win? Hey, cut by 2.5, cut by 250 basis points.
But are we bailing out the globe again, or are we just bailing out the United States?
No, I don't think they will. I think he's going to bail out. I think he's been very clear that climate change is not his problem.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else's global concerns are not his problem. His problem is his dual mandate, which he knows is bullshit and is, are two things that are effectively mutually exclusive: stable prices and full employment. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, unless you just get rid of the central bank, set interest rates at 4% and walk away.
Right.
And then let the market twist around 4%. Right. Which is what they should do. Or 4 or 5. Pick a number, reasonable. Just pick a number at this point and just let it sit there and just watch watch the real yield do this thing.
The real business cycle will fluctuate around.
Watch the real business cycle do this as a decaying, as a decaying signal, and eventually we get to a nice even rate.
Yeah.
And work out all the malinvestment through 3 or 4 or 5 different cycles, and then 20 years from now we go, let's raise interest. Yeah, we're 4% is probably a little low. We should go to 4.5, and then leave it there. You know what I mean? And stop tinkering and just put it somewhere, and then let the world react to it, and then figure it out from there. What I'm describing, by the way, is the international gold standard.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things we talked about in this month's newsletter, and it was actually a point that after I wrote the first draft of the lead article for this month's newsletter, Dexter turned to me and said, "Dude, it would be really great if you just showed the interest rate differentials of the major central banks, and then comment on why that's a weird thing. Like, why does that arbitrage between these central banks? Why do these carry trades even exist?"
Right.
And then you start asking yourself, "Oh, these are political decisions. These are not economic decisions. They're sold to us as economic decisions, but all the economics is bullshit."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or is it horse shit? Or is it cow shit? Or is it duck shit? I can't remember. I have to go back and check the chart of what type of shit is.
Mm-hmm.
So I tweeted that one out the other day. I was like, "Oh, that one's good. I like that one. I should bookmark that as opposed to just leave it in my timeline." But like, yeah, I don't know. Like, this is
on this.
Sure.
This is like a gold settled, or like every country using their own currency but settling in gold, right? Is this
A
essentially what we're talking
long-term
about?
settling trade imbalances in gold,
Right.
and allowing and
Because
eventually
if
what would happen over the course of time is that everybody would normalize around whatever we the people who actually make up the economy decide what the cost of capital should be, and then everybody's
right.
interest rates would rise and fall relative to the demand for the price of gold,
and
the
every
demand for physical gold.
country and every country then has to manage their currency against gold.
Right.
And if they're fiscally irresponsible, they pay the price internally.
Right.
And then their people suffer and their people overthrow their government. And
or we all just eventually move back to some form of Bitcoin/gold environment where the entirety of the central bank network is fully decentralized.
Right.
And, and all we have are private loans and all this. And we get back to effectively an armed society as a polite society because everybody's armed with the ability to remove their reserves and go, you know what? No, I'm not leaving my money in your bank anymore. That's what a bank run is. A bank run is literally the Second Amendment in financial form.
Yeah, great point.
I just thought of it. So, there, use it as you will. It literally just came out of my head.
So when it's on a Byte t-shirt, don't sue us.
Go for it. I don't care. I don't need credit on these things, Suze. I gave up that shit ages ago. I just want good ideas to promulgate into the zeitgeist. If they're true, they'll come back. And then when somebody reflects it back at me, go, the deuce you say. That's cool. Thank you. Appreciate it. And then we move on. I don't give a crap.
We'll put a little by Tom Luongo on the bottom.
Again, I don't even care. Again, I sincerely do not even care. And I mean that because ultimately there's always another good meme or another good idea or another good bon mot just right around the corner. If you're engaged and you're doing work, right, that's vital and valid, like it's going to get, you're going to get that, it's going to come back to you.
It's going to come back to you.
It's what's important is that you uncover truth, you make it pithy, you make it interesting, and then you give it to people to inspire them to promulgate it and then act accordingly. That's our goal. I don't need credit on this. Well, fuck credit. Like credit is irrelevant. Like we got a world to save here. Fuck that.
Yeah, right. We do have a world to save. Speaking of saving the world, that leads right into my next question, which when we think about society today, there's so much depression, nihilism. I mean, you coined the phrase, or you said here, the demoralization campaigns, right? This is and as a mechanism by which to control or direct or steer society.
Yes.
Transhumanism is in that mix. And I think a lot of us as Bitcoiners started from this perspective of like just a complete despair, complete lack of hope that we are going to dig out of this hole until we found Bitcoin. Sure. And for somebody like you came to this through libertarianism, Austrian economics. You probably got some hope by seeing that potential future. Bitcoin delivered that message to a whole new crop of humans.
To me, I just wasn't willing to listen to it when I thought about it. When I first saw Bitcoin back in 2010, I thought, cool. Now if they can, if everybody else sees what I see, we're in great shape. I just didn't believe it.
Right. Didn't believe it.
I mean, my despair, my hope, my schizophrenia, the way I put it in the article, and that because I talked about this in this month's newsletter, like directly about depression and about the ennui and like how Philip K. Dick saw it all in half of the books that are up here on my bookshelf behind me. And when you read books like The 36 Matter of Palmer Eldritch or Martian Time Slip or Flow My Tears, no, not Flow My Tears. That's actually a book about what happens when a narcissist is actually given this comeuppance, which is also a book worth reading. But when you read those books and you really internalize what he was talking about, even back in the 60s, he was talking about the world we now inhabit, and it takes many forms, and one of them for me was the raw skepticism of Bitcoin even becoming a thing. And it's not because I didn't see the value in it. I read the white paper and went, boom. I was telling Marty Bent this yesterday. I was like, I just had Marty on the podcast last night, and I'll put it out in a couple of days. we were talking about this very thing. And, I said, by the time I saw Bitcoin, I was already an alternative currency veteran. I already watched e-money blow up, or e-gold blow up. I was there at the Liberty Dollar. I own Liberty Dollar. I still have freaking silver certificates from those guys, right? I have a couple 100 ounces of silver of those freaking things. I can, and then I know what and I was an affiliate. I was getting silver for $4 a freaking ounce when it was trading for $7. It was freaking great. Are you kidding me? But by that point, I saw how the empire struck back.
Yeah.
I saw how hard it was to get people over that hump. And when I lost my initial crop of Bitcoin to, basically a keylogger, because my Bitcoins were on Mt. Gox, because I was dumb and I was trading them at $2 a piece. I just checked out for like 3 years. I didn't even want to get in. I didn't even want to get it back into Bitcoin until, forever. And I always thought there was something, and then after that, I had to tell myself there's something wrong with Bitcoin, and blah, blah, blah. It was a very, very hard psychological road back to Bitcoin for me. Today, Bitcoin's winning. It's beating all the shit coins. It's beating all these other coins. That's not to say that, there isn't, I always reserve the right to say, and I think everybody should do this. I think this is actually the strongest argument you can make for Bitcoin, which is to never say that Bitcoin is going to win. You say is Bitcoin is most likely going to win.
Right.
You have to maintain your skepticism, that last 5 or 10% or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Leave it there, because when you do that, you leave yourself open to the possibility that something better could come along. And
that it's not inevitable. We have to work for it.
Nothing is inevitable. The European Union has presented itself as inevitable. I've got news for you. It's inevitably going to go the way of the dodo. And every technology that has ever been invented by man, monetary or otherwise, has gone the way of the dodo and the dinosaur. Why? Because humans' needs change with time. And so that's not to say that Bitcoin cannot or will not serve a massive purpose at some point in the future. Even if, right now it's serving a particular purpose, which is to be a bearer asset in a world where capital movement is being destroyed. You will not move capital out of this political jurisdiction to that political jurisdiction. Fuck you, I own Bitcoin and the keys are in my head. And I memorized 24 words. Blow me. That's power. That's real fucking power.
Yep, for sure.
But that doesn't mean that Bitcoin's like the next reserve asset. There's a long way between that and that. That's not to say one doesn't imply that we could get there. Absolutely. But always understand that in order to get there, you have to get an entire 1 or 2 generations to buy in at that level, at a critical mass level.
Yep.
Are you kidding me? We still have nation states that are trying to lob nuclear weapons at each other.
Yep.
And the one guy that is keeping us from nuclear war right now doesn't believe in Bitcoin. He believes in gold. His name is Vladimir Putin. And if you don't think that Putin is important, if you don't think that Putin is a more powerful player in the global stage than, you, Mr. Bitcoin Maxi, sorry, you need therapy.
Yeah. We have a lot of potential, but there's a lot of work to be done.
Of course. And you should relish the idea that you have the work to be done.
Yeah.
Because absolutely. I remember when the work wasn't being done.
Yeah, at least now we have the tools to see that future.
Of course. Yep. And Bitcoin has surpassed my expectations as to what it would do. And I'm happy to I've said this many times. I'm like, look, I'm happy to be wrong about all this. Happy to be wrong. And my Bitcoin skepticism. But I would just go out there and steel man the argument. So why do you have to be a Bitcoin maxi when you can be a proof of work maxi? Because it's really the protocol that matters. It's really the idea of the system itself that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just applying money to it. Right, We're applying money to the system.
Well, no, you're applying these parameters around you can apply that to any other proof of work coin ultimately, because proof of work is the secret sauce, right?
Yeah, no, I was getting at, we're moving data on this proof of work blockchain, and we're just applying value to the data.
Yes, and blockchains
we're making it
themselves,
$1.
and blockchains themselves, as my friend Dexter White will point out to me all the time, are not in any way better than secured distributed databases. Sorry, they aren't. From a technical perspective, from a use case, from a variety of use case perspective.
Yeah, blockchain is not the innovation.
No, but what blockchain does is it does enforce a certain kind of discipline that creates a whole bunch of attendant and secondary, tertiary, and quaternary effects, which then can create value for the network itself, and then blah 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 blah. And so again,
it creates the time. It creates the time sequence, the time chain, and the transparency that allows all these non-trusted participants to validate.
Right, to validate and build trust in a decentralized, and we all know that we all know the routine. And I'm in no way, again, in no way, manner, shape, or form am I denigrating it. I'm not. I think it's brilliant. When I read it again, I read the Bitcoin white paper in June of 2010, and I went, oh wow, that's cool. And I'm in many ways I'm kind of glad that my life has worked out the way it has. Because had I just held on to those Bitcoins and they'd gone to AIDA, would I be the guy I am today?
Right.
Or would I be sitting on my own private island somewhere going, oh, I think I'll buy another Lambo? I had that many Bitcoins. It wasn't even
right. Yeah. I do see, and I don't know if you've seen this, but a lot of people that get into Bitcoin with the initial money goes up game plan. Or dollar go up game plan, number go up game plan. Eventually do move to this phase where it's like it's more important than just the dollar value.
Yes.
And I see that as hugely hopeful for society. And I'm hoping that Bitcoin mind virus starts to spread even wider for those reasons more than anything else.
It's the same thing with gold. I don't say I have X number of dollars of gold. I say I have X number of ounces of gold, and that's not enough.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's just that simple. I say I have a goal in mind of how many ounces of gold I want to own in my life, and pass on to my daughter, and I'm nowhere near that number.
Right.
I'm the same way. By the way, same way with Bitcoin at this point. It's the same way.
Yep.
I don't.
Yep.
And I did a couple of podcasts with my good friend Chris Sullivan of Hyperion Decimus, the Bitcoin hedge fund.
Love Chris.
Chris is a great guy, wonderful guy,
awesome.
and that he made that point on the Gold Goats and Guns podcast like 2.5 years ago, and that's one of the few I think, of my podcast. Very few of them are I would call evergreen in that respect, because they really are about a lot kind of working through where we are in the moment. But I think both talks that I've done with Chris are the kind of thing where you're talking about conceptually what you should be doing with your money and your time, and how you should be acquiring the assets necessary to build the wealth, to save into the future the things that you are going to need in order to achieve your particular goals. This is what it is. And I'm not really it's funny being a guy. I write 2 different investment newsletters, but I don't really believe in them. This is a fundamental kind of difference between myself and Dexter White. I don't really even believe in investment. I believe in savings. And savings can, throw off a little bit of return and whatnot. I do believe that investment is important, but at the end of the day, we don't live in a world where investment in many ways is worth the risk.
Right.
I want to get to the other side of that. I don't know that I'm going to live long enough to get.
Yeah, especially in a gold standard or a Bitcoin standard world.
That's where that's when I want to be investing. I don't want to be investing in this shit fucking world.
Right.
Like this is just way too much currency risk. Like I mean, literally, I sit around every day and I'm like, I could buy. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have dollar savings and I have those dollars at work, and trying to at least get that funds rate. That's not to say that, but that's all it is. It's just because I know I need dollars to live my life, but all the money that I've earned, and again, and I want to remind everybody that I I actively and specifically don't own a lot of financial assets, very few actually, because if I have skin in that game, it affects my analysis.
Sure. Yep.
And so I'd rather just stay fiercely independent of it all and just like, well, you know what? Yeah, I'll just keep living off of cash flow, and I'll just keep trying to build the business in such a way that I can live the lifestyle I want to live, do the things I want to do in this life, and put some money away every month. And if I do that, we'll figure shit out when I may be staring at actually maybe getting a couple of bucks back from my Social Security. Wake me when that fucking happens.
Yeah. But so Tom, we're 10 minutes away from 2 hours here. So and I have one last question I want to ask you. And it has to do with this idea, and you touched on a little bit in your recent article about this loss of hope that we're seeing spread through humanity.
Yep.
And loss of faith in institutions, right? Mm-hmm. We're living in a trustless environment where
yes,
you can't trust anything you hear, can't trust anything you see. Mm. It's becoming increasingly difficult to even validate what's true. And in that kind of world, how do people, I kind of get the sense that maybe there'll be so much distrust that people will just spin out and say, fall back on being human. This is like I'm done with trying to be involved in everything and know everything, and I'm just going to fall back to being human. Is this might be the homestead movement that's become such a big movement here in the United States. But there's also seems to be these other people like going full on transhuman, and they want chips in their brain, and they want to take every drug known to man to be up here at this new level of humanity. Like are we splitting into two different time frames? Like, are we going to go into two different worlds?
Such a good question.
Like, where are we in this?
I mean, that's a really good question, especially considering that, it was inspired by me, talking about Philip K. Dick, from in this month's newsletter, and which who grappled with this very fundamental idea for his entire adult life, right? All too brief life, to be honest with you. I don't know. I think that when we get too far away from what we evolved in, the milieu that we evolved in, which is, meat space outside my window as opposed to flat land that you and I are dealing with right now. When life gets a little too easy, which it is for a lot of people, because we've done yeoman's work in turning what is into what will be, right? We've done unbelievable work to harness the power of the universe. And I think about that as a former chemist, from the Gibbs free energy perspective, from a quantum mechanics perspective. These are fundamental concepts to and foundational concepts to the way I build my model of the universe. And my model of the universe is at best fucked, but I can tell you that we probably need to go back to that. I don't know whether we will. And that is that may be a frightening thought. But I'll tell you.
Well, these big 100-year events tend to send us back there, whether we want to or not, right?
I mean, I'm gonna next week I'm gonna sit down with Ben Davis and the Suspicious Observers and Dave Collum, and we're gonna have a 3-way talk about solar physics and all that stuff. And that'll be fun because I've been following Ben for a long time. I've never got a chance to meet him and chat with him, so that's going to be fun. And I'll tell you, there's always a crisis somewhere, right? and there's always an
Yeah.
apocalypse over the horizon.
Yeah, that's
So,
true. And it never
know,
tends to be as bad as I anticipate it to be.
well, yeah.
At least in my lifetime, right?
So far, and believe me, I've done many years of this, Paul. Like,
Yeah.
and I went crazy and built my own house in the middle of Florida, in the middle of the field in Florida 21 years ago, and I'm still like,
We're in the process of
who
doing
that
the
fucking
same
guy
thing.
was. I'm
We're
trying to figure
in
out
the
who that guy
process.
was because he was crazy, raising goats and composting eggshells and like all the whole 9 yards. And been there, did that, got the T-shirt, spent the 5 years, milking goats and selling goat cheese at the farmers market, and I've done it all from that perspective. And now I just want to, I don't know, I kind of want it a little easy, and I know it's not coming. So
Right.
I'm 56 years old now, and it's if anything, it's time to pass on all that knowledge to everybody else and figure out how to. It's that whole Gary North third top layer of the cake thing that I've talked about many times in the past. And if anybody has not read Gary North's seminal article, "The Top Layer of the Cake," every man listening to this podcast, stop what you're doing, stop listening to me filibuster, and go read Dr. North, because that fucking guy.
Wow.
Holy shit. So I don't know, Paul. I don't have a good answer for that one, but I think it's certainly we're out of balance at this point.
Absolutely.
Certainly in the West, we're out of balance. In other places in the world, not even close.
I guess the only hope I have is that when I look back through history at these existential moments, the universe has a way of just slapping everybody back to the middle, whether we like it or not, and whether we get there because of a good thing or a bad thing, but we end up getting there. It seems like, and we start
invariably
over.
We get what we deserve.
Yeah, right.
I hate
Tom,
and to end on one last note, and deserve
Yeah.
has nothing to do with anything, right? Winning money from the end of Unforgiven. This is like the greatest line ever. Deserve's got nothing to do with it, but in the end we always wind up getting exactly what we deserve. So
yeah. Well, Tom, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you for being so gracious with your time. Hopefully we can do it again in the future. And we're going to send you a book to add to that collection. Our CTO, who grew up in East Germany, family fled, wrote a book called 1983.
Okay.
It's taking all of today's current events and taking all the characters from 1984, moving it back to the 10 years prior,
right?
Ending with this year's election.
Oh wow!
Okay. So you might enjoy it.
I may. I've got a stack of books that I've been given by patrons. I'll just end on this note, and that I've been edified to watch them be inspired by all of this. And I sit down and I go, yeah, I keep getting another one. And my wife turns to me and says, so why haven't you written a fucking book yet? And I'm like, because I'm busy.
You're right. You're right. You're writing every month. So
yeah, there it is. So, but yeah, no, I'll be happy to. We'll round up after this and we'll go.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it, buddy.
Appreciate it.